So today we will learn how the pawn moves. The pawn moves in a straight. The pawn moves straight two squares on its first turn as it's on the home square. The home square for the pawns are in the second rank for white and seventh rank for black respectively. When a pawn has moved two squares, after that we can only move one square. Pawns do have a choice of moving two squares or one square on the first turn. They capture diagonally. For example, if the pawn two squares moves here, this pawn can capture this way. Yeah, I know this is weird, but you just have to remember it moves straight but captures diagonally. Okay, and it can never move backward. When a pawn promotes, when a pawn comes here, it is rewarded to a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight when we promote, and the pawn is removed from the board. Okay, so let us test with an experiment of a chess position. Okay, so in this position, by your knowledge of the pawn, can the pawn move two squares? Yes, they can. Okay, so let us take this e pawn and move it two squares. Let's say the black's d pawn moves two squares. Can you find a way that the pawn can capture a pawn? I hope you see that. This e pawn can capture this d pawn. Let's try it. It captures this pawn. Okay, so in this position, black's pawn is in c4. Okay, it's in c4 and it is threatening to capture this d3 square, the d3 pawn when it reaches. So we cannot move here because if we move here, let's say we move here. Okay, let's say we move here. This pawn can now capture us. We don't want that, right? But unfortunately, both of them, both of the moves that the pawn has will lead to the capture. You think this one doesn't lead to capture? It does lead to capture. This is called the En Passant rule. When a pawn moves two squares and the enemy pawn is right next to him in the squares that I highlighted, the pawn can capture here by moving here and then removing the pawn off the board. Right? So our pawn is going away even if we have the same example again. It's our turn. We are white. Where would we push the pawn to? That is a blunder. Cause after that, the pawn is obviously not moved to d5 cause it will get captured, you know. People are not stupid and will not do that. So instead, they will play d6 and they have controlled your only escape square. And remember, as I said, pawns after moving can never move two squares. They can never move two squares, right? They can never move two squares. So they are forced to move one square and it gets captured. Let's go back for a second. What happens if we push e3? Same fate. He goes d5, we go e4, and it gets captured. So, both of the moves were wrong technically. Okay. I'm thinking of pushing the pawn. I'm thinking of pushing the pawn and want to push this pawn in the center. I want to push this pawn to the center. How can I? Yeah, we can play e4. Right, we can play e4. Remember, these squares that are highlighted are the center. We need to control them. So we can play e4 to control this and play e5, d4 to control this. Right. So let's say we play e4. What if the opponent plays e5? He is controlling this, we are controlling this. So based on that, we play this move, c4. What if your opponent plays b5? Yeah, that's a blunder. Why? Because this is a free pawn. Yeah, no one's guarding it. This pawn cannot guard because it's not a horse. This pawn cannot guard because it's a bishop, not a bishop. So, yeah, pushing the pawn and then playing b5 or pushing here was a better option. But he didn't do that. So, what do we do now? Of course, capture. Okay, he plays another bad move, a5. Do you see where Do you see why is this a blunder? You think the pawn can capture. This pawn cannot be captured, right? Oh, yes it can. Thanks to the en passant rule. When a pawn moves two squares, when a pawn moves two squares and the enemy pawn is behind him, I mean this square, it can go capture en passant. See, en passant is a special pawn move by which a pawn captures another pawn that has advanced two squares. So, we are right. Okay, let's say our opponent pushes g5. We push a7 and our opponent goes f5. Should we capture? Yeah, you should capture. But there's another great move which I haven't taught you about. Promotion. You can select any of the pieces you want to, right? You can promote to a queen and yeah, it's a check. It's a check to the king. Or you can promote to a knight. You can promote to a knight. Or you can promote to a bishop. See, it controls lots of squares. Or you can promote to a rook. And it gives a check again. Promoting to a knight is also a good option. But yeah, it doesn't control a lot of squares. Instead, it just attacks the pawn. Okay. And we haven't learned about the other pieces yet. We'll cover in that videos. Okay. If you push f5, that will also be a blunder. Cause you can take this pawn for free. And yeah, there's no opposite rule because you see, there's no opposite rule. I mean, yeah, there's no opposite rule because the pawn did not capture. It did not. It cannot capture opposite because the pawn has not moved two squares, right? It has captured. So opposite is not possible. Okay, let's see if he pushes d5. We come here and he pushes this pawn. But we make a mistake. Why? Because yes, to the opposite rule, the pawn moves to squares, opposite, right? So black will go for it, which is a great move. And yeah, this was also a great move. Okay, this is a great move. And like if a king goes here, if a pawn goes here, I mean f4, which is a blunder because our pawn can take, right? And see how many squares it controls, right? It controls many squares. They're approaching towards the king, right? So, what if we place this g3, which is an inaccuracy? Do you capture? No. I think we have a better idea. That is push. Because if you capture, they get captured. The better idea is to push. And we're not thinking about the king right now. Leave it. Let's say the king moves here, which is a mistake. Now tell me, is this a good move or a bad move? Yeah, it is a bad move because the pawn's captured, getting captured for free. It's a bad move. So this pawn can capture this. Okay. Okay. What if the pawn pushes? Let's see what happens if you promote. Good job. The pawn gets a reward. Promotion. You aren't happy about that? Let's see. If the king comes here and what if we do this? That's a blunder. Cause after this move, he can promote to a queen also. Which check. It's a great move. And the king's forced to come. Check and checkmate. We're not talking about the queen yet. So I won't prefer this move for now. Instead, I prefer this. This one is also good. And if the king goes here, you got two queens. You got two queens. And that's checkmate. You can't go anywhere. Yeah, you'll learn about the queen later. But if the king moves here, you can promote to a queen and it's checkmate. I mean, it's double check. It's checkmate. Yeah, the king cannot go anywhere. So, I hope you learned about the pawn today. I gave you exercises. Isn't that enough? We'll see. Bye.